Hi, this is Brad Swift. I am the author of the Zach Bates Eco Adventure series. And recently, I had the pleasure of spending some time with some families online through Zoom for the first ever Zach Bates Eco Adventure Readup Hour. And I had the pleasure also of having my audiobook narrator, fantastic narrator by the name of Ben Fife, who joined with me in starting to read in character the first chapters of Book One, Dominion of the All. This is an abbreviated version. If you want to see the full version, it is available recorded just at the link that is below. I hope you enjoy it.
Zack was nearly finished cleaning the cage when he heard the frantic yipping that he recognized as Angus's, although it sounded a long way off. Zack also recognized the particular type of barking. Angus must have snuck across the street to chase the park squirrels. If Kalita caught Angus chasing squirrels again, they'd both be grounded for a week. Zack straightened up from his task and, grabbing an old rag to wipe his hands, ran out of the garage to find Angus. Sure enough, there he was on the other side of Wimbledon Street, prancing at the foot of a large maple, barking at a chattering squirrel above him. Angus, stop it! Zack shouted, smiling in spite of himself. He hated to admit it, but he loved watching his little companion chase after the flufftails. As far as Zack knew, Angus had never caught a squirrel, but the unsuccessful track record never deterred the vigor with which he pursued them. Angus definitely had a never say die attitude. Come on, get back over here where you belong, Zack shouted with a laugh. I'm really not looking to add a squirrel to the Bates Zoo, especially not after you get through with it. Maybe it was the excitement of the chase coupled with the expectation of further play that kept Angus from checking the street. He had learned early in life to always watch for traffic, but at times, even deep seated lessons are forgotten in the thrill of the moment. Zack noticed the error, but before he could open his mouth, the sight of the gleaming sports car bearing down on Angus froze the words in his throat. The car seemed to have materialized from thin air. One moment, the small dog pranced across an empty street. In the next instant, a sleek black and chrome missile bore down on him. Zack ran towards the street. Finally finding his voice, he screamed to Angus to go back, but his little friend ignored his plea. Zack wished his dog out of danger, wishing once more for a magic wand like a real magician. I could cast a bubble of protection around Angus, one that would send the car careening off in some other direction, or maybe when the car touched the bubble, it would disappear in a cloud of smoke and sparkles. But I'm not a magician, Zack thought, as he watched the nightmare play out in front of him. Not really, not yet. He had no magic wand or secret spell. For a moment, it looked as though Angus might make it across the street with only a very close call, but at the last second, the car seemed to leap ahead, its bumper striking Angus's right hip, skipping him across the hard pavement like a flat stone skimming across a quiet lake. The car veered to the left and skidded to a stop. Angus finally came to an abrupt stop as his head struck the curb with a dull thump. Now that the initial shock of the emergency had passed, his customary shyness had taken over again. Still, he liked her positive outlook and wished he could share in it. But as he looked at Angus's still limp body, a cold chill ran down his back, and he renewed his prayer with more vigor. Please, God, don't let my dog die. As he watched the drip drip of the IV, he heard a new voice. "He's going to die, isn't he?" At first, the voice was so soft and strange sounding in the empty room, Zack thought he had imagined it. Then he heard it again. "He's going to die, isn't he?" Zack looked in the direction from which the voice seemed to be coming. The black cat licked its whiskers and stared back. Was he hearing voices? He'd read somewhere that people under a lot of stress occasionally heard voices or had visions. Could it be happening to him? "My name isn't Tip," the voice continued matter-of-factly. "It's Ray Kit. That's spelled R-A-K-I-T, so you won't confuse it with Rocket or Racket." Zack stared at the black cat and noticed for the first time the tiny patches of white fur on each foot and the small six-pointed star of white fur on its chest. Someone is playing a very sick joke, Zack thought. He straightened up and looked around but could find no wires or speaker. He glanced at the door, which was still shut, then at the ceiling. No one was around, and he couldn't find an intercom in the room. "Yes, it's me." Zack jerked his gaze back to the cat, this time fast enough to see the cat's mouth moving in time to the voice. Perhaps he'd passed out. He'd been overwhelmed by his fear of losing Angus. At this very moment, he was probably lying on the cold linoleum of the clinic floor, Allison kneeling over him, wondering what had happened to him. In a few seconds, he'd come to and have an awful headache from where he'd cracked it on the floor as he fell. "Oh, come now. Surely someone who believes in magic shouldn't be so shocked." There could be no mistaking it this time. The voice came from the mangy black cat sitting before him. He might be dreaming, but if so, it was the most vivid dream he'd ever had. "I need you to do something for me if we're going to save your dog." Zack stared at the cat, unsure whether to believe what he heard. Everything was happening too fast. First the accident, then the trip over. Now a cat who claimed to have known the accident was going to happen and somehow knew Angus and his name? On top of all that, the cat now claimed to be able to save Angus's life. "Come on, snap out of it," Raykit said with a note of impatience. "Your dog is going to die if we don't act quickly. I was too late to stop the accident. Let's not be too late again. I'm a magic cat, but the last one remaining, and I'm darn good at what I do. But I can't bring him back from the dead, so let's snap to." Zack nodded, at the same time trying to clear his muddled thoughts. If the cat thought it could save Angus, what did he have to lose? "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Open the door and lift me into the cage," Raykit instructed. "But if I do, the oxygen will—" "Darn the oxygen! Do what I tell you, boy, if you want your dog to see another day." Raykit's tail flicked with angry impatience. Zack jumped to do as he was told, wondering as he did so whether his actions would help Angus or speed his death. He opened the cage door and lifted Raykit into the cage, surprised at how light she was. Under her thick black coat was nothing but skin and bones. The cat strolled over to Angus and placed her gnarled left ear against his chest. "Tch, tch, not good. Not good at all." She turned back to Zack. "It's worse than I thought. We haven't much time to complete our negotiations. I can still save him, but we must be quick about it." "What are you talking about? What negotiations?" Zack suddenly thought of running for Allison or Dr. George. Maybe they'd be able to help figure this whole mess out. But even as he thought it, he knew the cat would refuse to talk with them around. It had obviously waited until he was alone before saying anything. "You remember I just told you I was coming to save Angus from the accident and had a favor to ask of you in return?" Zack nodded. "Well, I'm asking you to agree to the favor now. I'll save your dog. I can still do it, in exchange for granting me this one favor." "But what favor is it?" Zack asked, exasperated by Raykit's vagueness. "What do you want me to do?" There's the catch. I'm not allowed to tell you until you agree to do it, no matter what." "This is ridiculous." Now it was Zack's turn to snap. "You want me to agree to something, but you won't tell me what? And you won't save Angus unless I agree to do it? Why, that's blackmail." Call it what you like. It's the rules I must follow. Believe me, it's not easy being a magic cat. We have a lot of silly rules. They don't always seem to make sense, but for the magic to work, they must be followed. It's like some of your silly laws. They don't seem to make sense, yet at the same time, someone says they have to be there for society to work. Ray Kit glanced over to Angus and back to Zack. Meanwhile, as we sit here and debate the fairness or unfairness of the universe, Angus is on his way out of it. What will it be? Can you really save him? Zack asked, as a new set of tears streamed down his face. Ray Kit nodded. Okay, then do it, Zack answered. Ray Kit rose and looked around to be sure she was alone, then walked through the wall to the outside. She stood for just an instant, with only her head sticking out of the wall, and glanced in both directions. Assured that the coast was clear, she completed her passage through the wall. The last thing she needed was for someone to find her rump sticking out the wall on the other side. She strolled down the she strolled down the drainage ditch towards the back of the hospital. The catnip had taken its full effect by now, and she struggled to remember her mission. Oh yeah, it was time for her meeting. How could she forget so easily? She didn't bother answering her own question, for she knew the answer all too well. At the end of the ditch was a thick cluster of trees. She climbed out of the ditch and sat at the edge of the small forest and meowed a couple of times, trying to imitate a tomcat in heat. After a few moments, she heard a soft rustle in the underbrush. She repeated her signal. You've been at the catnip again, haven't you? The deep, husky voice from the bushes asked. I have not, she replied quickly, and after a moment asked, How did you know? It's the only time you use that silly cat call, the voice replied. I've been forced to use a tremendous amount of my powers the last couple of days. I only use it for medicinal purposes. The deep voice chuckled. How many times have I heard that excuse? Although I suspect you might be right for once. How has it been going? Ray Kit heard more rustling in the bushes. Don't come out, she said quickly. I don't know how safe it is. Don't worry, I'm only getting comfortable. I'll be glad when we get on the road. Any idea when it will be? Tomorrow, the next day at the latest. And to your previous question, everything has gone well, although it's been very draining. Ray Kit realized the questions were clearing her head and was disappointed the catnip's effect wore off so quickly. He bought it? The voice sounded surprised. The whole pack of lies? Of course he bought it. He didn't have any choice in the matter. And as for it being a pack of lies, Samson, I had to do it this way. We've been turned down by a dozen other kids. No one else on the list would take on such a dangerous assignment. Zack was our last chance, the only kid who even remotely qualified for this mission. The stakes are too high to risk having him not accept. Ray Kit, have you no conscience? You almost killed his dog. I know your magic is powerful, but it's also been somewhat unpredictable the last 50 years or so. You had no way of knowing for certain whether that car would crush his dog into the next life or not. It was a huge risk. Ray Kit could feel her temper flare despite the catnip, and knew it was because her companion was right. It had been a big risk, although a necessary one. She had been able to swerve the car at just the last instant, and it had been enough. She didn't enjoy hurting animals, not even a dog, but their mission was too important to be overly concerned with what she liked and didn't like. Listen.